This talk is an excerpt on trust and vulnerability from Daniel Coyle's excellent book, The Culture Code. If you want more information on this, I'd recommend reading the book in full, as it covers how to bring this into practice in your teams. Now I'd like to introduce an experiment that was run called the Give Some game. It works like this. You and another person whom you've never met each get 4 tokens. Each token is worth $1 if you keep it, but is worth $2 if you give it to the other person. And so the game or experiment consists of this decision. How many tokens do you give to the other person? This is not a simple decision. Obviously, if you give all the tokens you have, you might end up with nothing. If you're like most people, you end up giving an average of 2.5 tokens to a stranger, slightly biasing towards cooperation. What gets interesting, however, is how people tend to behave when their vulnerability levels are increased a few notches. In one experiment, subjects were asked to deliver a short presentation to a room full of people who had been instructed by experimenters to remain stone-faced and silent. The presenters were then invited to play the Give Some game afterwards. You might imagine that the subjects who endured this difficult experience would respond by closing up, becoming protective and less cooperative. But actually the opposite turned out to be true. The speakers' cooperation levels were 50% higher than others. That moment of vulnerability did not reduce their willingness to cooperate, but boosted it. And the inverse was also found to be true. Instead, increasing people's sense of power or safety, that is, tweaking the situation to make them feel more invulnerable, dramatically diminished their willingness to cooperate. The link between vulnerability and cooperation applies not only to individuals but also to groups. In an experiment by David Desteno of Northeastern University, participants were asked to perform long, tedious tasks on a computer that was then rigged to crash just as they were completing it. Then one of their fellow participants, who was actually a confederate of the researchers, would walk over, appear to notice the problem, and generously spend time fixing the computer, thereby rescuing the participant from having to restart all their work. Afterward, the participants played the Give Some game, and as you might expect, they were significantly more cooperative towards the stand-in person who had fixed their computer. But here's the thing, their cooperation levels received the same boost toward complete strangers. In other words, the feelings of trust and closeness sparked by the vulnerability loop were transferred in full strength to anyone who simply happened to be in the room. The vulnerability loop was contagious. Of this, Destano said, "We feel like trust is stable, but instead, every single moment, your brain is tracking your environment and running a calculation on whether you can trust the people around you and bond with them." So trust comes down to your context, and what drives it is the sense that you're vulnerable, that you need others and can't do it on your own. Normally, we think about trust and vulnerability the way we think about standing on solid ground and leaping into the unknown. First, we build trust, then we leap. But science shows that this isn't so. Vulnerability actually doesn't come after trust, it precedes it, and without vulnerability, then trust doesn't materialize. Leaping into the unknown, when done transparently alongside others, causes a solid framework of trust to materialize beneath our feet. Thank you for listening to this lightning talk on vulnerability and trust.